After Stephen's white moonlight, Cindy returned to the country. She didn't like me. Stephen then sent me to jail. When I got out, Stephen came to pick me up. Don't make her mad anymore. I'm still supporting you. I smiled. No need. I have a new man now. I got into the car of his archenemy. Stephen's face changed instantly. You dare to try with someone else? When I got out of jail, Stephen came to pick me up. Driving a sports car, leaning on the car door, he looked out of place in the dusty environment of the prison. He handed me a cigarette. You've been through a lot. He lit it for me, unusually considerate. Let's go buy some jewelry as a way of apology. I looked at his handsome face, with his long eyes covered by long eyelashes, always unclear about what he was thinking. Seemingly smiling, indifferent. He walked and said, You go back and apologize to Cindy, saying you won't make her mad again. I'll find a villa she doesn't know about and hide you there. Cindy is his fiancée, my archenemy. The one who could sentence me to jail with just a word, nearly causing me to die in prison. Now fortunate enough to be alive and out, Stephen wants me to apologize to her. Looking at his carefree appearance, I suddenly remembered 3 years ago. 3 years ago, just like this, Stephen offered a cigarette to the impoverished me. I heard your family went bankrupt, why not follow me? My family had gone bankrupt at that time. My dad ran away, leaving my seriously ill mother and me, who knew nothing. My mom needed a large sum of money, and even working 3 jobs a day couldn't make enough. I went to all my friends for help, even kneeling to beg when things got really tough, but all I got was ridicule. This circle worships the wealthy and looks down on the poor. I was pushed to a dead end. In the most desperate moment, it was Stephen who saved me. I became his mistress. My mom got the treatment she needed. I moved into his villa, drove his sports car, and those limited edition high-end jewelry returned to me. Stephen told me to just enjoy everything. When our relationship deepened, he kissed me in the late-night bedroom. Stay by my side, just be happy, don't think too much. But after experiencing bankruptcy once, I changed my lazy nature, forced myself to exercise, do yoga, and maintain a good figure. I underwent medical beauty treatments to keep my appearance. I picked up the long-forgotten piano and violin, always ready to perform for Stephen. I even studied economics, arts, and literature so I could chat with him if needed. The harsh reality after bankruptcy taught me one thing: if someone is willing to give you money, you'd better keep them happy. I used to be known in the circle as arrogant and unreasonable. But now, I've even learned baking and cooking. I've even learned horseback riding. If Stephen needs it, I can go to his horse farm in the outskirts at any time. Stephen once pinched my chin, his other hand caressing my face. Actually, you don't need to do all this. He said, just dress up and look pretty. I gave him a sweet, standard smile. Mr. Stephen, I'm willing to please you. Stephen helped me, and I wanted to be dedicated. But I was too dedicated. I was so dedicated that I forgot I was supposed to be Stephen's pastime funded by his money. I even started to secretly fantasize about growing old with him. Before my family went bankrupt, I was also considered a socialite in the circle. So nobody told me that the main rule for a mistress is not to fall in love. If you do, you'll end up in misery. I didn't know. So when Stephen's white moonlight Cindy returned to the country, I faced retribution. Stephen loved Cindy. And Cindy loved Johnny. The day she chased after Johnny overseas, Stephen took me in. Later, I realized that Stephen was supporting me because Cindy and I were the least compatible in the circle, basically archenemies. He was venting his frustration that Cindy didn't love him. Unfortunately, at that time, I thought Stephen liked me. I had no sense of danger. Stephen hadn't come to see me for a long time. I thought he was busy. I called him, he hung up directly. I thought he was busy. One day, he came back and went straight to sleep, with red marks on his neck. I still thought he was too busy, or his immune system was weak and he got a rash. Early the next morning, after much struggling, he hugged me tiredly. I won't ignore you, trust me. I was very touched at that moment, thinking he was too occupied and now finally attending to me. It wasn't until Cindy showed up at my door that I realized what he had been busy with. Cindy looked at me like a championship dog looking at a stray. "Cherry, how can you be someone's mistress?" She sneered. "Stephen proposed to me last night, and I said yes." She showed me a ring. "Cherry, do you know what a mistress is? I wouldn't even bother with someone like that, not worthy of being called a rival, just an object for release." I looked at that ring, which I had shown Stephen once. I was shy when I showed it to him, already having imagined what kind of wedding dress I would wear. But now it was on Cindy's finger. I wanted to endure it. But I couldn't. The word whore was too harsh, and that ring was too glaring. Stephen had been too good to me, making me feel I had the right to compete with Cindy. I raised my hand, and with a swing from left to right, I gave Cindy 2 slaps, producing 2 crisp sounds. Cindy covered her face in shock. I work out regularly and have quite some strength. She looked at me coldly and after a while, chuckled. "Do you think Stephen really spoils you? Cherry, he's just using you to piss me off. Just wait, there will be times when you cry." I felt anxious at that moment. But when Stephen came back at night, he didn't scold me. Instead, he treated me even harsher. I was almost falling asleep, and he even carried me to take a bath. Before I fell asleep, he lightly said, "Cindy is important to me, you shouldn't hit her." I nestled in his arms, trying to open my eyes to look at him. Stephen held me in his arms, smelling my hair. "You need a little punishment to behave." I thought the punishment would just be a good workout. I shyly kissed his chin. "Okay." I had been trained to be a canary. As long as I could still be kept in a cage, I felt happy and secure. Stephen's behavior afterwards didn't show any trace of anger. He even took me to the company and taught me about business. I was grateful and focused on learning. Whatever Stephen asked me to do, I would obediently do it. Some of the tasks seemed strange, but I didn't hesitate to do them. A month later, Stephen's lawyer sued me for embezzlement. I didn't even know about this accusation. I was completely confused. When I went to see Stephen, the office was locked, and the usual password didn't work. I called him, the number that I could always reach, but now it was out of service. Until the police arrested me and took me to jail, I hadn't been able to reach Stephen. Only his lawyer left me with a cold message, "Behave well in there, I'll take care of your mother." And that's how I ended up in prison, feeling utterly hopeless. Life in prison was tough. I was beaten as soon as I got in, my eyes swollen shut. Later, I was beaten until I couldn't get up. Then I was beaten until I knelt down begging for mercy. After that, I died once and then started fighting back, retaliating. I was covered in wounds, gritting my teeth, like a desperate and enraged mad dog. Whoever provoked me, I would bite their throat. When I was released from prison, no one in the whole women's prison dared to mess with me. The former heiress, the mistress, all died in that prison. What survived was a mad dog. Carrying the remaining half of my life, this mad dog was released today, and Stephen was waiting for me at the gate. He patted my head casually, with a slight smile on his lips. "You better behave from now on, don't make her angry. I will still take care of you." He buried his head in my neck, sniffing my hair washed with cheap shampoo. "The scent has changed, but it's okay, it'll be back soon." He still thought I was the delicate canary who loved being in a cage. Unfortunately, I wasn't. I was a mad dog covered in wounds, full of hatred and vengeance. I struggled out of his embrace. Stephen frowned unhappily. "What's wrong?" I pointed to a car parked nearby. "Sorry, I found a new man." Saying that, without looking back, I got into the car. As the window rolled down slowly, a young, handsome, and free-spirited face smiled at Stephen. "Long time no see." Stephen's face gradually darkened. Johnny. Johnny used to dislike me a lot. Coming from a self-made family, he had been ridiculed by the old money families and had never liked people like us. But when I was in prison, it seemed like the whole world had forgotten about me, yet he was the only one who came to see me. I saw his puzzled expression and asked him why he came. Johnny, with his long legs propped up, looked me up and down. I think you're a pity. He said, I remember you. After going bankrupt, you didn't wail and lament, but worked hard as a mistress. He mentioned two things that left a deep impression on him. First, when Stephen was out socializing and got drunk, almost falling over, I rushed to support him and acted as a human cushion, even though my palm got scratched and bled. I didn't flinch, not even frowned. Second, one time he saw me coming out of a bookstore, carrying a few books on modern art investment. And a week later, he heard that Stephen became fond of modern art, auctioned a metal artwork, and its value increased considerably. Johnny leaned forward. So, I think you're a pity. You treated being a mistress as an important job. Despite working so diligently, you couldn't compare to Cindy just frowning or pretending to be spoiled. Stephen must be blind. Hitting me where it hurt, I remained silent, hanging my head. Johnny smiled, but I'm not blind. Cherry, come find me when you're out. I'm more reliable than Stephen. He saw determination and aggressiveness in my eyes, traits that he needed. So on the day of my release, right in front of Stephen, I got into Johnny's car. Johnny chuckled while driving. By getting into my car, Stephen must be furious. At a red light, he even took out his phone and took a picture with me, picking up my babe. Let's celebrate tonight. Almost immediately, Stephen messaged me, Cherry, is this how you want to play? Who doesn't know I've been with you for 3 years? Do you think anyone wouldn't mind? I looked out the window without saying a word. In a corner of my heart, there was a sharp and painful ache. Indeed, someone you've been with for 3 years knows best how to undermine your self-esteem. But the more it hurts, the more I will hate. Cindy called Johnny. In our circle, there's a strange tendency. When we, who are usually the center of attention, meet someone who doesn't care about us, we become even more obsessed with them. Johnny had a rebellious nature, and if a circle rejected him, he would scorn that circle. Once, it was said that Cindy was treating everyone to drinks, but Johnny, in a bad mood, slammed his glass down, turned around, and walked away without giving Cindy any face. Instead, it made Cindy think about him, and she pursued him even when she went abroad. Cindy urgently asked over the phone, Johnny, when did you two get together? Just now, successfully confessed my love, Johnny replied carelessly. Cindy anxiously said, don't you know? Cherry let Stephen sleep with her for 3 years, and when he got tired of her, he kicked her to jail. Stephen didn't even see her as anything special. Johnny, aren't you disgusted? She looked at me with disdain. She was a mistress, you know. I bit my lip hard, closed my eyes. I knew Johnny wouldn't mind, because he wasn't really trying to sleep with me. But I still gritted my teeth. I remembered my past, feeling like the air was mocking me, ridiculing me. But I had no regrets. When life wants to break your pride, it doesn't need a big fuss, just a bankruptcy application, a sick mother, to make you beg on your knees. I just lowered my head under pressure. Cindy and I had been competing for years, from dresses to jewelry to travel to connections and boyfriends, we were neck and neck all the way. But now, we finally determined a winner and a loser. Cindy won, but she won by luck. And I lost to fate. Johnny glanced at me, one hand on the steering wheel, the other patting my hand. He interrupted Cindy's chatter, no, shouldn't you be ashamed? Cindy was confused. Johnny repeated word for word, aren't you the one who should be ashamed? You, a woman who has known Cherry since childhood, clearly Cherry's mom was seriously ill, and Stephen, as a friend, took advantage of Cherry in her vulnerable state. You didn't speak up for Cherry, instead helping a man trample on a girl's reputation. How about it? Are you a real man? You find Cherry dirty. I'm not disgusted by Cherry. I'm disgusted by your heart. Cindy remained silent for a while. After a few seconds, she cried in anger and hung up the phone. Meanwhile, I stared blankly at Johnny. Johnny raised an eyebrow and said, I guess I can be quite eloquent, huh? I nodded in a daze. Just then, as the car drove out of the shade, sunlight shone on his face from my side, warm and gentle. Suddenly, my mood improved, and I smiled, saying, "Thank you." That night at the restaurant, Johnny announced to a group of people that we were together. Cindy came in with Stephen, her chin held high. Johnny hugged me and said, "This is my girlfriend, take good care of her." Cindy's friend looked at me and said, "But aren't you with Stephen? I saw you two having dinner together the day before he went to jail." Unfortunately, as soon as Cindy returned, Stephen began cleaning up the mess. Cindy laughed. Stephen, with a cold face, said, "We weren't together, just fooling around." He glanced at me, embraced by Johnny, a hint of cruelty in his smile. "Old toys, once you're tired of them, toss them where they belong." I clenched my fist, wanting to retort. Johnny patted me on the back, whispered in my ear, "Don't worry, I got this." He raised his glass and teased, "Why is Stephen's face so pale? Is he unwell? Take care of yourself then. Because you think it's a game, while the other person may be suffering. You think it's pleasure, while the other person just wants it to be over quickly." Stephen asked, "What do you mean?" Leaning against me with his tall stature, Johnny replied, "It means nothing. Just heard a lot of complaints from Cherry, remembered a few lines, that's all." He pinched my cheek. "Cherry, right?" Blushing, I nodded. "Why do you remember all of that? Don't bring it up in front of everyone." Stephen's face grew even paler. The room fell silent, and everyone's gaze towards him was awkward. Stephen gritted his teeth, but remained silent. With his temperament, he would have left long ago on any other day. Yet today, although angry, he didn't move. It truly surprised me. I had a few more drinks, feeling a bit tipsy, and went to the corridor to get some fresh air. In less than a minute, Stephen followed me and stood beside me, asking, "Were those words really from you telling Johnny?" "Buzzed," I replied with a smirk, "you guess." Stephen, looking pale, said, "I'm not guessing, tell me yourself, you used to tearfully beg me to confess to you." I furrowed my brows, cutting off his recollection. "I didn't tell Johnny those words." He breathed a sigh of relief. I continued, "But every time I was with you, I treated it like a test, only caring about how many points I could score. Who cares how you performed? I don't care, I don't feel anything." Stephen's face darkened. I smiled at him. "Am I pretending well? Am I worth the allowance you give me?" Stephen gritted his teeth. "Cherry, you're deliberately trying to provoke me." I shrugged and walked towards the private room. "If you feel provoked, then so be it. As long as you're happy." Stephen grabbed my wrist. "You think you can just leave once you have the upper hand? You don't care about your mother anymore." I shook off his hand. "Don't threaten me. I'm not your mistress anymore." He looked stunned, dedicated. It's like he suddenly understood something, squinting his eyes. "Are you faking your obedience? When my family was not bankrupt, Cindy and I fought for so many years, how could I really be obedient?" I walked past him without looking back. "Stephen, it's important to know oneself. If you've fired an employee, don't expect them to come back. There are plenty of companies in the world. Also, Johnny paid for my mother's treatment for a year yesterday. Actually, Stephen kept his promise. When I was in jail, my mother's expenses were never delayed by a day, and Stephen even visited her a few times. But at that time, he claimed he saw me as a sister and said I was on a business trip, so he was taking care of the elderly in my absence. My mother couldn't move and couldn't call me. Luckily Stephen was good at comforting her and making her feel at ease. However, I didn't feel grateful to him at all. I worked diligently and tirelessly as his mistress. If there was an award for being a diligent mistress, I would definitely make it to the list. But he wasn't a good boss. Instead of promoting and increasing salaries for employees, he brought them imprisonment. As I reached the door of the private room, I turned back and mocked him. "Stephen, you are so hypocritical. Which brother would sleep with his sister?" Stephen gritted his teeth. "Is it being in prison that made you so vulgar? When I first entered prison, I treaded carefully, like walking on thin ice. No one dared to offend me. But I was almost beaten to death, couldn't even get soup during meals. Later, I fought back, ending up lying in bed unable to move. It was Fiona who protected me. She was smooth and ruthless, no one dared to mess with her in prison. Hearing about my family's bankruptcy, she fell silent for a moment, sighed. Before I came in, I visited your father on behalf of the company. She shared her food with me, taught me how to read people, how to please other tough characters. She taught me how to fight the hardest, how to either endure getting hit, or be ready to risk your life if you fight back. You may survive getting hit, but fighting back is uncertain, think carefully. Fiona taught me. I looked at my arms dripping with blood and closed my eyes. I had earnestly wanted to be a dedicated mistress, but ended up in prison. I had humbly wanted to be a well-behaved prisoner, but was treated like a dog. I had enough. I was fed up with this world that bullies people. I once wanted to compromise in this world. I crushed my wealthy lady pride and ground it into dust. But the world just ignored me. I lay in bed, watching my blood, staining the sheets red. At that moment, my pride was pieced back together bit by bit inside me, making me lift my head with a face full of dirt and shame. From that day on, I refused to compromise, to endure. I could let go of my life, but I couldn't bear to lose my dignity. I would reclaim the lost face even if it meant risking my life. Every day, I fought, without caring for my life. I traded scars for dignity. The price was several fierce scars, and saying goodbye to wearing low-cut clothes forever. And now, I must replay the incidents in prison in this circle. When I returned, I didn't know what Johnny had told others. Everyone looked at me with respect in their eyes. Johnny's family was new money, but currently rising strong, making many people look down on them while fearing them, also knowing about the fierceness of the Johnny's family, warning their children not to provoke them. After a meal, Johnny got drunk and grabbed my hand, swaying as he walked outside. Stephen's face turned grim. Where do you think you're going? I was puzzled. Going home with Johnny, where else? Stephen took a deep breath, gritted his teeth. Shouldn't you go check on your mom? I blinked. Now? In the middle of the night? Stephen fell silent. Cindy looked up at him, looking uneasy. Stephen, I'm not feeling well. Stephen then realized, I'll take you home. As I got into Johnny's car, my phone buzzed, and I glanced down to see a message from Stephen. I'll give you one more chance, come back to me. I couldn't help but chuckle and showed the message to Johnny. Leaning on his chin, Johnny said, 3 points. I asked him, when can I take action? Over 8 points, he replied. I nodded, closed my eyes, and remained silent. We sat together in the back seat for a while without speaking. He just dropped me off at an empty apartment he owned, and as I was getting out of the car, Johnny suddenly said, new money isn't all brainless, some are reliable. I didn't understand why he brought that up and just nodded blankly. He stared at me, his eyes shining brightly in the darkness. After everything is done, what do you want to do? I shook my head. I haven't thought about it. He smiled at me, then closed the door. I turned and went upstairs, thinking while walking, my smile was quite charming. Early the next morning, I received a call from my mother's hospital. Miss Cherry, sorry, we don't have any more beds available at our hospital. We'll refund your fees. Please transfer your mother to another hospital. I was stunned. Can they do that? But after a while, it dawned on me. That hospital had shares owned by Stephen's family. I called Johnny, and he immediately contacted the hospital, arranging for a better one to admit my mother. Johnny took my mom away with the doctor. I stayed back to pack up her things. He was efficient and got my mom settled in less than an hour. Just then, Stephen showed up. I saw him about to leave and he stood at the doorway blocking my path. Don't you want to see me? I raised an eyebrow and replied, you can't even tolerate a sick person like my mom, and you expect me to be grateful to you. Stephen frowned and said, Cherry, you know how to make me change my mind. Stay away from Johnny, and I might consider continuing your mom's treatment. I interrupted, no need to consider. I transferred my mom to another hospital. I stepped aside, showing him the empty room. Now, we have nothing to do with each other anymore. Stephen was shocked for a moment, then clenched his teeth. You think you can just walk away? He said coldly, what's gotten into you? So what? Johnny is younger and more handsome than you with no ex-girlfriend bothersome. I chuckled. Stephen, where do you measure up to him? Not even a little bit. Stephen's temple veins popped out. Cherry, you are testing my patience. He grabbed my chin. How dare you act this way? He kissed me with anger, trying to dominate. He held my arms tightly behind my back, and I couldn't break free. I stopped struggling, like a puppet, letting Stephen do as he pleased with no reaction from me. Stephen paused. You didn't used to be like this when I kissed you before. I wiped my mouth disdainfully. Before, I was obedient and dedicated to my work. Stephen's face darkened. He held my face and kissed once more. Yet, still no response. I stood there like a lifeless doll. Stephen couldn't believe it. Cherry, what's gotten into you? I sneered, grabbed alcohol wipes from my bag, and scrubbed my mouth vigorously, indifferent to the pungent smell. What's with me? I'm done, I said coldly. Back then, I devoted myself to him, and he threw me into prison. And now he comes back asking what's going on with me. I wiped my hands with the wipe, threw it in the trash, and walked past him. Stephen, thank you for kicking my mom out of the hospital. Now we have no more connection. I hope you're happy. Stephen growled behind me. Cherry, you used to love me. I could see it in your eyes. I chuckled even more. Then, one of us definitely needs to see an eye doctor. I called Johnny and briefly explained. When I mentioned Stephen kissed me twice, Johnny hesitated. I'll be with you whenever you see him. I was puzzled. What about the plan? I picked you because of your strength, but taking down Stephen doesn't require you. Johnny replied calmly, at least not in this way. I hung up, took a few steps forward. Because from the corner of my eye, I saw Stephen. His face was unsuspecting, brows furrowed, walking out of the hospital towards the parking lot. I pretended to check my phone and walked towards the parking lot to create a chance encounter. When I reached Stephen, I twisted my high heels harshly and hurled myself to the ground. My ankle immediately swelled, piercing pain erupted. But it didn't matter. I got used to enduring pain in prison. Stephen hesitated, then hurried towards me. Closer and closer until I could see the concern on his face. Although my brow was aching, I felt relieved in my heart. 2 points for me. It's really strange. What was easily obtained was taken for granted. What was unattainable haunted the mind day and night. Like Stephen now, embracing me with worry. He never showed concern for me in jail. He accompanied me to the doctor, carefully attended to my meds. Cindy called him. Stephen answered, Cindy, I'm in a meeting now, can't talk, call back later. He then hung up. I lowered my gaze, remembering how Stephen hung up my calls back then. And I naively believed him. CT scans, broken bones, protective gear, limited movement. Stephen reassured me, it's nothing, you'll be fine in a few days. I nodded, I know. I obviously know. The old Cherry would have treated a broken bone as a huge deal, bedridden for 3 months. But the Cherry in jail, a broken bone was as simple as losing hair, it was eat, fight, and sleep. Stand up revealing the monstrous scars on my waist, left by a toothbrush stabbed in. After being in jail, I found that even an A4 paper folded into a stick could be stabbed into someone's neck. Stephen's hand on my arm stiffened. He pointed at my waist in disbelief. What happened here? I casually replied, got stabbed in prison. Stephen froze, as if he heard something terrifying. I limped out, didn't need any protection, and didn't even hum a word. Stephen caught up with long strides, hugged me from behind. You used to be afraid of pain. He muttered, I didn't expect this. Of course, people like them would never know what it's like to go to jail. He held me tighter. I understand why you've been ignoring me, Cherry. Give me a chance to make it up to you. I didn't know it would turn out like this. I lowered my eyes. Almost there. Stephen dropped me off downstairs, relieved that I wasn't living with Johnny. He asked me, why don't you move back in with me? I'm afraid you won't take care of yourself. I looked at him in surprise. Forget about Johnny, what if Cindy finds out? Will you send me to jail again? Stephen lowered his eyes, disappointed. No, not this time. I didn't think it would be that bad. I thought you would just lose your freedom. I chuckled. How confident I was back then, thinking this kind of person would care about a fling used out of spite. I waved my hand. You have Cindy, I have Johnny. Don't stir up trouble, it's not going to work between us. Stephen didn't say anything. As I went upstairs to wash and have dinner, I glanced out the window, and Stephen was still downstairs, smoking one after another. After Stephen left, I messaged Johnny, updating him on the situation. Johnny showed up late at night, holding iodine and protective gear. After rambling on about his regrets, Stephen didn't even think to get me protective gear, he just tried to send me money. Johnny put my foot on his knee, carefully putting on the gear, and treating the abrasions with iodine. He frowned. You're too reckless. I shrugged. How else can I succeed? Johnny wrapped my foot in gauze. If relying on your recklessness is the plan, I'd rather stop. He carefully treated my wound, fearing hurting me. I felt some deep emotions. Relying on myself, I could take him down in 6 months. I'm just impatient. He looked up at me, but I can take it slow. I shook my head. Johnny, you don't understand. I have to do it myself. It's my obsession. If not, I'll live with regret for the rest of my life. Johnny disagreed, and I emphasized, if I can't do it, I'd rather go back to jail. Johnny stared at me for a long time, eventually gave in. What about after you've done it? You have to think ahead. You can't retire to jail, can you? I shook my head. I don't know. Right now I just want to bring Stephen down. Johnny sighed and asked me, do you have any hobbies? I saw you learned a lot following Stephen. Do you have any likes? I thought about it. None. Everything was just to please Stephen. Johnny asked again, what about before Stephen? I didn't know why he was interested in this, but I thought about it. When my family hadn't gone bankrupt, I quite enjoyed gardening. The balcony was lush with flowers and plants, and there was a greenhouse in the yard. All maintained by me, without the help of servants. Johnny nodded, stood up. I'll find you a part-time maid. You rest these days and don't rush to find Stephen. I shook my head. No, don't treat me as weak. You've seen me in jail, you know what I'm like there. Johnny smiled. You truly are the one I've chosen, rest well. After Johnny left, I had dreams at night. I dreamed of my little garden, all the flowers withered. But in jail, I couldn't water them. I cried to Stephen, to Cindy, to all my friends. They just laughed and watched me cry. No one was willing to help me. Finally, Johnny reached out his hand. I can help you, but you have to help me with the plan. He pointed at Stephen. Help me bring him down. I want to take over his territory. I looked at Stephen's cold face, nodding fiercely in my dream. I dreamt all night, and in the morning when I woke up, I saw 2 messages on my phone. One was from Stephen, asking if I was still in pain, saying he would bring breakfast. The other was from Johnny. He sent me an address, a large piece of land on the outskirts. When everything is over, would you like this place for a garden? I didn't reply. I once trusted and relied on someone, but it ended miserably. Now, I dare not rely on anyone again. I don't want to. In the complex place like jail, I managed to survive. Why should I depend on anyone now? Stephen showed up early in the morning to find me. Unfortunately, I was not there. He called me. Where did you go so early? I was eating a sandwich at the convenience store and told him. Johnny was worried, took me to the hospital for a checkup. Stephen wasn't happy, but I brought you breakfast and pain reliever. I retorted. Johnny's going to the office soon. If you're free, wait for me. If not, then forget it. Stephen hesitated, gritted his teeth. I'll wait. Stephen had never waited for anyone. It had always been others waiting for him. I sensed he was unhappy. I went shopping, had afternoon tea, spent the whole morning outside. 3 years of prison life. I had almost forgotten how to shop. After 10, he called me. Are you coming back? I was getting my nails done. I told him. Johnny wants to have lunch with me, asked me to wait for him. You can go back first. I hung up after that. Stephen called again. I didn't pick up. After a while, Stephen sent me a message. Cherry, don't treat me this way. I know you're getting your nails done. I heard the noise. You used to care so much about me. Why are you treating me like this now? It hurts. I glanced at my phone and chuckled. Before going to jail, I had also messaged him begging, Stephen, don't treat me this way, I'm scared. But he didn't reply, just heard his lawyer tell me to reform well. I texted Stephen, I'll be 1 more hour, can you wait? Stephen replied with just 1 word, wait. An hour later, I saw Stephen's silver Bentley downstairs. He was leaning against the car door, smoking. When he heard my footsteps, he opened his eyes in the smoke, bloodshot, and asked accusingly, you did that on purpose to make me wait? He looked puzzled and said, Cherry, you used to be very caring towards me. What can I do for you to return to that state? He lowered his head in front of me and said, I know you still love me, Cherry. I give up, okay. I looked quietly at him with his bowed head. After a while, I reached out my hand to him, Stephen, I can't walk anymore, carry me upstairs. Stephen bent down, picked me up, and carried me upstairs obediently. He carried me upstairs, poured water for me, helped me take off my shoes, and did things he would never have done before. He even went to the grocery store downstairs, took off his expensive suit jacket, and made me a meal. As I watched his busy figure, I couldn't help but feel resentful of my old self. If this could make Stephen change his heart, then what was the point of my past efforts? Cindy called while Stephen was in the kitchen making soup for me. Tomorrow was Cindy's birthday, and also the anniversary of Stephen's engagement to Cindy. Cindy asked him what they were going to do tomorrow. Stephen, focusing on the bubbling pot in the kitchen, replied a bit impatiently, figure it out yourself. He hung up, then served me a bowl of soup and said, break up with Johnny, okay? I can cook for you and take care of you forever. He looked at my waist, then lowered his head, saying, I owe you. I drank the soup without saying a word. Stephen helped me clean the room, and while he was doing that, I answered Johnny's call. Hey, what's up? Johnny, is Stephen there? I replied affirmatively. Johnny, wait for me. You can't move around easily. I'm afraid he'll take advantage of you. I said sternly, don't forget what I told you. Johnny hesitated for a moment, then gritted his teeth. I shouldn't have collaborated with you in the first place. It's been troublesome every day now. I hung up the phone. Stephen asked me, Johnny? I nodded, he's afraid I'll be bored, so he wants me to work at his company. Stephen put on his coat and left, looking upset. However, he came back. Our family has a business in another city. Would you like to go there? You can be a manager directly. He looked at me eagerly and said, Cherry, let's move away from this city and start over. Let's start afresh. I pondered for a while and nodded. I'll give you another chance. Stephen was excited like a child. I knew you couldn't forget about me. I smiled softly. 8 points, get started. Stephen got me to that company. This company was not closely related to Stephen's family business, and the outside world didn't know it was his family's enterprise. Johnny flew in. I'm worried that Stephen will take advantage of you. I've been staying here during this period of time. He looked deep into my eyes and said, the plan is not important now. Your safety is more important. I avoided his gaze and changed the subject. When it comes to emotions, once being at a disadvantage was enough. I parachuted into the company and at first, no one was convinced by me. But I could handle mistresses and criminals with ease, so handling a normal job was a piece of cake. I worked hard, with strong abilities and eagerness to learn, so my colleagues quickly accepted me. Also, Stephen visited me several times, showing his obvious appreciation for me. I slowly gained the trust of everyone. Although I wasn't allowed to handle the company's core business, the finance department no longer avoided me. I often worked until late at night, staying in the office alone until the wee hours. One night, Stephen called me drunk. Cherry, I bought a villa nearby, it's all furnished. He said, I checked it out. There's a good international school in that area. If we have children in the future, we won't have to worry about their education. I was puzzled. Why are you telling me this? Stephen smiled happily. I want to set up a home with you in that city, have a few kids. I asked him, what about Cindy? Stephen shrugged. She won't come to this city, she won't have any intersection with you. This place will be ours. I felt disgusted but smiled gently. Then you better give me a promotion first. The next week, I became the company's vice president. I worked even harder, never leaving the office until there was no one else, because that's when I could get things done easily. Johnny assigned 2 programmers to assist me in hacking into the company's computers in the dead of night to get what I needed. Every day, I worked until the early hours, slept for 4 hours, then hurried to work. I lost 10 pounds, had dark circles under my eyes, swollen lymph nodes, and occasional rashes on my body. These were the consequences of staying up late. Johnny frowned. Are you planning to drive Stephen away with your life? Is it worth it? I smiled and replied, it's worth it. They once stomped on my face and rubbed it against the ground. But I happen to be someone who is more vain than valiant. Late at night, I drank strong coffee in the company, thinking of Fiona. She not only taught me how to survive in prison, but also many other things. Including how to falsify accounts, launder money, manipulate the stock market, and discern big events from small details. When I was released from prison, Fiona helped me fix my hair, sighing, we are both abandoned children. I have to stay for a few more years, but you are different. There was a fervent light in her eyes. You can go out there and show them that even abandoned children can overturn the chessboard. Fiona used to be a senior executive at Stephen's company, but she was framed, sentenced to more than 10 years. That was their style. Once you were no longer needed, they would ruthlessly abandon you, push you down into the abyss, without even a word of apology. They treated it as a matter of course, with a light-hearted attitude. But I find their laughter annoying. I want to overturn, no, smash their chessboard using the identity of a castaway. Also smash their high and mighty attitudes. I set down my coffee, put away the hard drive, and go downstairs to have dinner with Johnny. Johnny has been keeping me company here for half a year. He smiles and says, my parents are full of energy every day, me staying in the company is also bothering them. He lowers his head to cut steak and casually says, I might as well keep you company. I take a sip of white wine and smoothly change the subject. It's been half a year, the evidence collection is almost done. Johnny raises his glass, thank goodness, you finally don't have to see Stephen anymore. He sneers, Stephen still wants to settle down with you, does he know he's engaged? I chuckle. How can you have moral expectations for Stephen? My hard drive is almost full. It's filled with evidence of Stephen's family money laundering, illegal foreign exchange, and securities manipulation. The so-called old money, arrogant as if their necks wouldn't bend and their heads wouldn't bow. But behind them lies a muddy, extremely foul-smelling world. This company was specifically created by Fiona to do dirty work for Stephen's family. She knows exactly where the evidence lies on each person's computer. I've visited her before. She got a reduced sentence for good behavior. Seeing me, she smiles happily, Cherry, you look so good since you've been out, all dressed up. Don't come back here, this place is bad luck. I nod with a smile, okay, I'll wait outside to greet you. Just as I was leaving, I told her, the evidence against Stephen's family has been collected. Conservatively speaking, they're all going to be exposed. Fiona froze for a moment, nodded, tears welling up in her eyes, urging me to leave quickly. As I walked out, I heard her crying loudly inside. No one dares to mess with Fiona in prison. The Fiona who was willing to fight to the end, looked like a child of grievances at this moment. She sold herself to Stephen's family at the age of 22, worked hard for over a decade, too busy to even get married, only to be abandoned by Stephen's family and thrown into prison in a matter of seconds. Compared to her grievances, mine were nothing. As I walked out of the prison, I took a deep breath and made a call. Hello. I want to report entrepreneur Stephen for money laundering. Johnny helped me stir up attention online, all the evidence spread all over the internet. Public opinion was in an uproar. Stephen's family became the target of everyone's anger. They were put under intense scrutiny. Stephen's empire was crumbling, in a panic, and Johnny seized the opportunity to take over many of Stephen's businesses. He squinted like a hunting wolf, devouring his prey without mercy. Stephen hasn't come to see me this month. Heard he's been working tirelessly for days, saving the family business with an 4 drip. But he called me, saying, "It's you." With a firm tone. I nodded, yes. Stephen seemed puzzled. Why? Have I not been good enough to you? I laughed. These young masters and misses, if they condescend to look at someone, they think that person should be eternally grateful. I remembered the dream I once had, where Stephen fell in love with me because of my dedication to work, a beautiful ending like Cinderella marrying the prince. I chuckled with tears in my eyes at my past foolishness. I bring greetings from Fiona to your family in prison. Hope you enjoy your stay there. Stephen fell silent for a few seconds. How do you know Fiona? Thanks to you, I became friends with her in prison. Stephen abruptly hung up the phone. I may not have the power to harm him, but Fiona was enough to make him afraid. Still in a panic, Stephen managed to spare time to hire the best lawyers to sue me for business crimes. But before the case was even filed, Stephen's family collapsed. Stephen was the first to fall, and several others in his family followed, all ending up in prison. I went to see Fiona again. The guards said Fiona had been behaving well, keeping it up. She might be released in 5 years. Hearing about Stephen's family's downfall, Fiona smiled, sending others to prison all along. Now it's their turn to taste their own medicine. She asked me, "What's your next move?" I thought for a moment. Images of my little garden from before, fragrant and delicate, came to mind. I said, I might open a flower shop. Fiona laughed and said she would come work at my flower shop in the future. I laughed too. With you on board, we might as well make this flower shop go public, right? Walking out of prison, I got into Johnny's car. As Johnny drove, he casually asked me, "Want to come to my place? Give you a share?" I shook my head. From today on, we don't need to meet so often. I have my own things to do. Johnny made a turn, parked the car on the side of the road. What do you mean? How do you see me? I turned back puzzled. As a teammate, what else? Johnny murmured a few words, drooped his eyebrows, and drove off. After 50 meters, he stopped again. Does it have to be just teammates? Can't it change? I looked at his disappointed expression, like a golden retriever unable to get the chew toy, and burst into laughter. The sunlight shone on the side of his face, just like the day he picked me up from prison. I lowered my head, holding back a smile. Let's see how it goes. Johnny, surprised, exclaimed, "Does this mean there's hope?" He regained his enthusiasm, turned the steering wheel, whistling as he drove us forward. The sunlight ahead was just right, shining on us, comfortable and warm. Several years later, on a sunny afternoon, I sat in the flower shop tending to my flowers and plants. A disheveled figure walked in, looking like he wanted to buy himself a bouquet, but hesitated. She turned around and saw me, shouting in surprise, "Cherry! What are you doing here?" After staring for a long time, I finally recognized her as Cindy. Her family had fallen on hard times, and she didn't want to work, following my path to become someone's mistress. But I didn't want to belittle her. If it wasn't for her pushing me to leave Stephen, her present would have been my future. I didn't believe Stephen would find a mistress fascinating for long. Maybe the day I wasn't fascinating anymore, even going to jail would be too hopeful. Cindy had been worn down over the years, losing her initial arrogance and haughtiness. Looking at me, a hint of jealousy flashed in her eyes. "You've made it now, owning a flower shop, and leasing a huge flower field in the suburbs, covered in the news. But you've ruined us." I lowered my head. "You should be glad I didn't end up like you, putting people you don't like in prison." Lifting my shirt, I showed her the wound on my waist. "This is just one of them. I was stabbed several times with a toothbrush, thought I wouldn't make it." The scar looked like a gaping maw with fangs, silently staring at the one gazing at it. Cindy took a few steps back, too scared to say anything. I chuckled. Are you scared already? I could tell you about my prison experience if you want to be even more terrified. Cindy trembled. You're not trying to scare me, are you? I shook my head. I had no intention of making things difficult for her. To cut to the chase, the one who personally sent me to prison was Stephen. She was just an accomplice, and she had learned her lesson too. I handed her a black lily. Take this, happy birthday, but don't come to my shop anymore, Cindy. Cindy looked at the flower, her face suddenly flushed, and she ran out. After a while, she ran back, picked up the flower. Her eyes were red. I know what you mean, but I haven't received flowers in a long time. She lowered her head, choked up. I'll take it as your blessing. Watching her in tears, I thought for a moment, took the black lily back from her hand, and exchanged it for an African chrysanthemum. Don't come back again. After Cindy left, Fiona walked out from behind the flower shelf. Softened up, didn't you? She's not the main culprit. I shook my head. Let's go, check out the next shop. At the shop door, Johnny stuck his head out of the car. Where to next? I'll drive you. Fiona teased me with a smile. Is he still your teammate? When did that change? I walked toward Johnny, saying as we walked, it's coming soon. When I become stronger. When I'm strong enough to not fear betrayal or hurt, not afraid of all the side effects of love, I'll smile and embrace love. And now, the sunlight shone on Johnny's and my faces, warm and comforting. I closed my eyes, savoring the warmth of this moment.